host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. After a little hiatus, but with good reason, we are back with a vengeance. So I am so excited to share our guest with you all today. This is somebody who I recently had the pleasure of meeting, not only her, but her husband, at a retreat through wellness counseling. And we had such an incredible time on a private island in Panama, being taken care of so well by the staff there, learning from one another and sharing such a great experience with the group of people that were really meant to be there, talking about their retreats and what they have planned. So we're going to focus on intensives today and taking a sabbatical as a therapist. So Charity O'Reilly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Julia. It just brings such a huge smile to my face. Just all the memories. It feels like just yesterday and also a year ago that we were in Panama together. And what an incredible experience and so many great connections between therapists. So beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, likewise. This is one of the benefits of having a platform like this, where I get to hand select people that really impress me and that I am inspired by, and I get to share them with other people. So you are absolutely one of those individuals. So share with us anything that you feel is relevant from your career climb that set you up for success with this intensive model that you now practice in your therapeutic work.
Yes, I'd love to, Julia. I know we got to talk about it in Panama, and you had framed the journey as a roadmap, which I've thought about so much since then.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about, my own roadmap, and my journey, my roadmap started, as I think it does for so many of us, with my own personal experiences of for me, it was childhood trauma. And, when I discovered therapy and discovered what was possible out there for healing, starting to ask myself, how could I enter into this world as a therapist, and how would I want to do that? And, really early on, when I was actually still an undergrad, I answered that question for myself, that I would want to do that in a retreat setting. I would want to provide a space for people where they could be in nature, where they could do yoga, where they could have a nurturing cup of tea, just all the things that, me and my little 17-year-old self that I really would have valued with healing. And so I had the dream to make that a reality one day. And then, as happens, I think to many of us, the roadmap took a different turn, and I ended up on a different path for a long time, for 17 years. But I wouldn't trade those experiences, because, the professional development that I was really lucky to receive when I was working in community mental health, I often think of for new therapists, just how important those experiences are. Don't get me wrong, there was a lot of trauma in those experiences too. I'm not saying that it's all good, but I had the opportunity to go to trainings that I never could have afforded as a new therapist. I had the opportunity to be supervised by people who'd been in the field for a really long time. I had the opportunity to build incredible connections with coworkers that are still very close friends to this day, that I can call on when I get stuck clinically or in my practice or otherwise. And I gained experience, some of it experience that I would say, oh, that's a population I actually don't want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But then so much of it experience that really shaped my practice today and helped inform the clients that I do work well with and that are
Mm-hmm.
my population. So it was a long meandering journey, but I'm really grateful for all of the steps along the way. And then I guess I
Yes.
should say that about 6 years ago, I left that job at the nonprofit and I started an intensives only practice. And so I currently practice for the last 6 years. And as far into the future as I can see, although things can always change, where clients come to me from all over the world for 5 days. So I work with people for 5 consecutive days, 6 hours a day. We use IFS-informed EMDR to process through their trauma. And we also use a lot of body techniques and somatic work as well. And I do that every other week. So I see 2 clients a month for 5 consecutive days, and that's my practice. And I do it in the retreat setting that I dreamed of, in nature with yoga and all of those things, and lots and lots and lots of tea. So I'm finally living that dream.
I love that for you and for your clients. So what intrigued me, and I'm sure many others, about this model is that we all can relate to the typical clinical hour and what that looks like for most of us. And when you get into that as your schedule and your structure for providing therapy, and you're typically providing talk therapy, and I do think that that has its purpose, but learning from you and from others how trauma affects the brain and how it can be really challenging to expect a client to be able to do some of that really intense work when they haven't necessarily gotten those tools yet to regulate or to feel as safe as they need to be able to go there. And you're spending time catching up session to session. And then you obviously have to close and schedule your next session. It doesn't leave you very much to work with. So the idea of this is fascinating to me. Before we get to how transformative, I can only imagine that it's been for the clients and what you see throughout those 5 days and in reflecting at the end. It's so easy for us to hear, okay, I started here and then I transition into an intensive only practice and it's working great. I would love to break down a little bit more how you made that decision for it to be 5 days, for it to be IFS-informed EMDR, for it to be on your property in a separate structure. But that's also another element that's really intriguing. So how did the way that you do this specifically come about through your early experiences?
Yeah, I love all of those questions. So, the decision to host here on our property weirdly came kind of naturally to me. I grew up in a gigantic family where we just always had people in our home. And I know that for many therapists, it's really weird to think about having clients on your property. And I just want to also say that there are a lot of complications to it and a lot of liability things that have to be taken into consideration. And it really is not for everyone. So, for people considering an intensive practice, they might not want to host that on their property. But for me, it was a really natural fit. When my husband and I were looking to buy our home together, we looked for a property that had a separate structure on it. We call it the cottage. It's a small house. It's a 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom little house, 300 years old. It's adorable. And we call it the retreat cottage. And we did have to do a major remodel to get it to the place where it could be welcoming for clients. But that was a lot of fun to do because I got to design kind of the therapy space of my dreams. There's a deep clawfoot tub, there's a wood stove, there's a library, there's a yoga room, there's a massage room. So it's really just so welcoming to people. And you were referencing how, of course, how difficult it is for people to approach their trauma healing work, as it was for me as well. And over, what happens is people walk into the space and they look around and either they start crying happy tears or they just take this deep sigh and they say always some variation of, I can't believe this space is here for just me all week. And so, yes, some of that is about their trauma healing journey and finally having space held that's separate just for them. But some of it is also because they're moms. They are hardworking people. I see a lot of therapists. They're used to holding space for and taking care of everybody else. And I think there's just really something very special about welcoming them to this space, to inviting them into that this healing is going to happen together in community, so to speak. Now, listen, we have a lot of boundaries. I don't eat meals with my clients. I come back to my house. I don't actually even go to the bathroom in the clinical space. I come back to my house. We've got lots of boundaries set up to keep it really safe and protected. But I do think there's something really special about that. I'm welcoming them here to where I live and where my husband lives and where our chickens live. To begin that healing work. And then you'd asked about the clinical hour, and you're so right. I mean, I practiced EMDR for a really long time in weekly practice, and I still do consultation for lots of therapists who do that. And I would always say, back before I started intensives, when I was, in supervision with my staff at the time, we're lucky if we get 20 minutes of trauma processing in an hour session. 20 minutes, you're doing great if you get that. And that's so hard to ask of people, to be with their trauma for 20 minutes at a time. Now, I will say there are people for whom that is the better option. There are sometimes people I will tell about my intensive model and they'll say, that sounds like hell. I don't ever want to be with my trauma for 6 hours a day for 5 days in a row. So for some people, holding space for that 20 minutes is actually all that they would like to do. And that feels really good to them. Mm-hmm. But I hear people often compare it to getting surgery. And if you were getting surgery and your surgeon said, oh, time's up, we gotta, you mentioned the word wrap it all back up. We gotta stuff everything back in and put some sutures in, and then we'll reopen you next week. I mean, it's an appalling thought. And for some people, that's what doing trauma processing just 20 minutes at a time is like. Yeah. And then finally, to answer the question about why I chose IFS-informed EMDR, honestly, because it was the most transformative for me in my journey from healing trauma. And I would say my entire practice now has been designed what I wish I had when I started my healing journey. So that includes the clinical modalities. It includes everything about the space. I'm a bath person. I'm a tea person. I'm a nature person. I'm a yoga person. Other people, that's not their favorite things. They want to go do some other kind of intensive. But the people who love those things are the people who find me, because I designed the space that I wish I'd had.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And what a beautiful blend with those two modalities. So I think so many of us, and I do hear some variation of this on each podcast episode, the evolution of everyone's journey to where they are now so many times has come out of those early experiences and filtering through what they really needed. I think a lot of us in this career, we can say that in our own way as therapists. But also when I find people that have started group practices or the way they structure their business, that so much of that is also being mindful of what was lacking and wanting to make sure that they fill those gaps. So I love that. So I also understand that IFS-informed EMDR, and you reference this, can also take many forms. For some people, it is beneficial to have that within a 1 hour clinical session. But there's also the opportunity to meet for a few hours at a time. So what led you to the decision to offer that for 6 hours a day for 5 days?
So the first person I ever heard about intensives from is Dr. Ricky Greenwald. So for anybody who doesn't know Dr. Greenwald, he is the director of TICTI, the Trauma Institute and Child Trauma Institute. And one of the wonderful things about Dr. Greenwald, so first of all, he was my EMDR trainer. So years prior, I learned EMDR through TICTI. And then he got on the path of doing intensives, unbeknownst to me. This was after I was basic trained, and started doing research about intensives. And he does a lot of research because his goal and his hope is that one day insurance will cover intensives if he can build enough evidence for that. And so I first heard about intensives from him when I was just, in an advanced EMDR training that you have to do to keep up your EMDR credits every year. And he mentioned intensives. And he said, this is how I've started working now. I only work in this model. I see people usually for 5 hours a day. They were actually at the time doing 5 days in a row for 7 hours in a day was what TICTI was doing at the time. And so I had never heard of anything like it. And I immediately decided to try it. I was still at the nonprofit, but I had a small private practice on the side I had for years and just, was so busy and overwhelmed. I didn't have any time to really attend to that. But I asked one of my clients, would you be willing to do this with me? Try this new modality. So I took some PTO. We did it over a holiday weekend. And it was transformative. It was so transformative for her. It was so illuminating for me. The next thing I did was I went to my own intensive at TICT because I said, well, if this really works as well as it thinks it does, I need to experience it for myself. And also know is with that client, I was still working full time at the agency. I didn't have 5 days to give to her. I didn't have that much PTO. So I wanted to experience that for myself, see in my nervous system what it would feel like to do EMDR for 6 hours, 7 hours a day for 5 consecutive days. I loved it as a client. So at that point, I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And when I first started hearing in the past few years about intensives in all these different models, I had never heard of those either. But I just love that with an intensive, you can really do anything. You know, you can do 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. I guess you could do 10 hours. I don't know. You can do however many hours you wanted. And I will say I made some mistakes, as we all do as we're learning things. And actually, I did a few 7-day and 10-day intensives early on. I did one 14-day intensive, and I learned really quick that my nervous system could not sustain that. But what felt good to my nervous system was the 5 consecutive days. And I ended up doing 6 hours a day because that felt better to me.
Yeah.
And actually, TICT has since moved to that model as well.
Wow. So I have so much respect for someone who wants to have their own experience with something in their process of figuring out what could potentially work best for clients. And I think what you mentioned is so significant, how that affects your nervous system. And just a reminder for all of us out there that are listening that that is something that we don't want to overlook, and how important that is in the process, just for sustainability and for our own wellness. So I am considering what someone listening might be asking about this. And I think a big component, and I love the conversation that you and I had about this in Panama with regard to the financial side of things. And so how you set pricing for that. But I would also be interested in really just kind of your model and mindset, but also the marketing piece, because I'm sure this is something that for some people, this is exactly what they were looking for. And you shared what a lot of people comment on when they arrive. But to identify people that are a right fit and manage maybe some of what might come up for those of us out there considering this, to those where it might be cost prohibitive, or they might not be able to take the time to do something like this when it could still be very beneficial.
Yes. And there's so much to consider when a therapist is considering an intensive practice. And my best advice always is to give a few different things a try while you are still in whatever your practice is. So if somebody has a weekly, hourly practice, can they try with one of their clients like I did? Can they even just try for a weekend? And they might find, oh, I love the 6-hour model. I love the 3-hour model. Actually, I hate this and my nervous system doesn't want to do this at all. And I want to keep doing weekly therapy. But then once you've noticed, okay, this is what my nervous system can sustain, this feels good to me, I do think marketing is the biggest issue that therapists run into. And I see this all the time with my consultees. And I have good news and bad news. So the bad news is that I'm not really qualified to speak to marketing on any podcast, because I've just been really fortunate that I started my practice when intensives were still very new. And so it built very quickly because people were looking for this and there weren't many people offering it. And since then, my practice has sustained itself on word of mouth. So most of my clients come to me because they know somebody who came to me. Okay. However, the good news is I know people who are so great at teaching marketing. Stephanie Feld is a wonderful resource for anyone. She talks about what she calls embodied marketing, which is 70% of therapists are women. And for most women, marketing doesn't work the way that it does like out there in the sales world for men. It just needs to be more embodied, more nervous system friendly. Now, I think men would benefit from that too. Yes, of course. But, women might be a little bit more aware of that and we have maybe more blocks around it. So I would highly recommend people reaching out to Stephanie. Do you do marketing coaching, Julia? I know you do coaching for therapists.
I do. So when I work with therapists that are expanding from solo to group practice, we always will spend at least one of our meetings together focused on marketing, because it's twofold. It's making sure that they have enough referrals to fill the new clinician, but it's also marketing to try to find the right clinician. So I would definitely not identify as an expert, but a lot of what I'm sharing is at this point with my consulting business and my own group practice, I have explored every marketing avenue besides paid ads, and I have a person for that. So I do feel like I can give some resources, examples, suggestions in helping people find what avenue feels the most aligned and authentic for them, but far from an expert.
Well, reach out to Julia then for everybody. I think I want to do an intensive practice, but I will say that I consult with a lot of therapists around building their intensive practice. It's harder these days. Yeah. The field in general is harder these days. We're, noticing that in the economy. We're noticing that because of big AI platforms. So of course, intensives are no different. And I would not say for anybody that they shouldn't consider intensives. I think that start it on the side, start it small, start one at a time. Maybe you'll hit upon your niche that really needs this and doesn't have it yet, or maybe it'll be a slow build, but either way, there are supports out there, whether that's with you, whether that's with Stephanie Feld, whether that's with the million other great people that are out there. I really believe that it's such a freeing and transformative model to work inside of that people should definitely give it a try.
Yeah, you've definitely got my gears turning. There's no question. And I'm sure it's the same for those that are listening. So the piece around how this might not necessarily work for everyone, but you are such a great example of how it works for plenty. And you have not had any trouble in all of these years keeping your availability full and word of mouth spreading. So anything else that you can share about that as you've gotten more immersed in the community of others that are now offering this model to provide some reassurance to those that are listening if they're skeptical that maybe they've taken insurance for their entire career and maybe are having a hard time envisioning how this could actually work.
Yeah. So one thing I just want to note there, the insurance thing is fairly complicated with intensives. And I also would really recommend Stephanie Feld's resources about that. She has a lot of free resources as well on her YouTube channel. I have never taken insurance. When I worked at the nonprofit, we didn't take insurance. We were federally funded. And then I've never taken insurance in my private practice. And so I really respect clinicians who are trying to make that transition. This is not legal advice, but for many people, they do need to open a separate business to run intensives if they're still going to be taking insurance clients for their weekly clients. Because otherwise the waters are too muddied. And so
right, because you are required to adhere to the contract that you're under. And so keeping that separated makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Exactly, because insurance currently does not cover intensives. Again, Ricky's doing a lot of research on that, but who knows how long that will be. This also leads me to, you had asked actually about pricing before, and I totally forgot to answer that question. And intensives are a high ticket item. And so there really are barriers for people to pay out of pocket for intensives. I know a lot of people will do like payment plans and things like that to help offset that. But for me, what's been so important, and I know we talked about this in Panama, is pricing my intensives at a price point that feels really good to my nervous system, where I know you love the Enneagram too, where my Enneagram 2 self does not become resentful of my clients because I'm charging too little. And certainly starting out, I did charge too little and I did become resentful about that. And so charging at a price point where I joyfully walk into that session every single day for 5 days in a row, and I feel great about it because I am being reimbursed at a rate that feels fair to me. And that rate has changed many times because I change, the world changes, what I'm offering changes. And so I do think there's a lot of flexibility in pricing of intensives. I do think that when you're experimenting, it's okay to experiment with a low price point to just kind of try with that client that you already have. Many therapists do that very successfully just to get the experience, because once you have the experience of how much an intensive can transform somebody, you can't stop talking about it. I can't stop talking about intensives. I talk about intensives to everybody, and I believe in them. And so it makes it, is that marketing? I guess it's a way of marketing. I don't do it like online or anything, but I just talk about intensives incessantly. And so it's because I've seen that they work. And so for people to get that experience and see that it works is really helpful.
Yeah.
And I love it. So answered your question.
You did.
Oh,
Thank
I did.
you.
Okay, good.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you really illuminated that it is going to have so many factors to consider when you are setting your pricing. I think it's going to be different for different people. Your model and the fact that it's 5 days, it's on your property, there's a certain level of preparation and cleaning and food like we talked about. And, as opposed to in an office-based setting, or if you're doing it for less of an amount of time. And so, I think it's great to know that you offer consulting on this. I'll definitely make sure to include your contact information. And if anybody wants to learn more about this or have direct access to you, they should come to Sedona in October, or they could come to Seattle in August 2027. So I'll include the links there. But this was such a great overview to get the gears turning for people about how this could be possible and really transform your practice. And just like when I work with people on, do I take insurance or am I going to be private pay? It's possible to do a mix. And I think you're also sharing with people that you want them to do some trial and error, dip their toe in, see what works, see what feels right for them and their clients. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, and it can be a gradual transition. Would you agree?
100%. And that's the only way to know what your nervous system is going to feel good about. Try a bunch of different things, see what really feels best to you. And the other thing I would add there is that includes with your niche or your population, because people do some really pretty cool and interesting things with niching with intensives. I was talking to somebody yesterday who does intensives about pet loss. So there's like some very cool things. I consult somebody who does intensives about OCD with hoarding in the home. She goes into the home with people and helps them with their hoarding related to OCD. She does ERP. So like niching is so cool around intensives, because that is, I think, what can help people market, but experimenting with that to see like, what do I really love? If I were going to have an intensive practice, who would I want to work with? I'm not the greatest example of that. My niche is CPTSD, which is so many people, but there are these really cool specific ways that people are doing it too.
Anything that you could share about how you determine who would be a good fit for this? Is it a consultation call? Do you have a questionnaire that they complete? And what are some indicators that somebody might not be a good fit for an intensive with you?
100%. I mean, I do think that intensive with you, a question is important for everybody, because somebody who's not a fit for me might be the perfect fit for somebody else, might be somebody else's ideal client. So for me, what I do, I first do a free 20-minute consult. And for me, the consult is about listening to my nervous system. And the question I am asking myself on that call is, could I spend 5 days with this person and my nervous system feel good about it? Every time I have overridden that, it has been a terrible mistake. And so that is what I'm asking in the consult call. Now, what I ask them to do in the consult call is the same thing. I ask them to sit with their nervous system, notice how they feel about me, and am I the right person to spend 5 days with? And then I never ask for a decision on the consult call. I say, we'll both think about this and see where our nervous system settles. Because again, as an Enneagram 2, I know that I will people please and be like, sure, you can come. And again, when I've done that, I have learned the hard way that I need some time to let my nervous system settle, and I ask them to do the same. If it's a yes for both of us, the next thing I do is I have a 3-hour assessment, and they've done a lot of work beforehand. I have a very, very extensive intake packet that I send them through my practice portal. So they fill out a trauma history, dissociation and PTSD inventories, but also things related to attachment. They do the adult attachment inventory. They do things related to infancy and in utero experiences, because my goal with a 5-day intensive is actually to work chronologically through a person's entire trauma timeline. And so I want to know a very 3D approach to their entire life. So all of that paperwork happens before we even meet, and then we meet for 3 hours to make sure that we are very clear about the goals for that 5-day, and that we've agreed ahead of time on what our EMDR targets will be. And I also like to start getting to know their parts a little bit, just to kind of know who's likely to be with us during the week. So that's my process. You'd ask about sort of like what's not a good fit for me. For me in my practice, urgency is not a good fit. Somebody who is coming because they urgently need something. So like I get a lot of requests like, I'm just on FMLA and I need to come right now while I'm on FMLA. That's not a good fit for me. I have court coming up and I need to get this resolved before then. The work I do is really about doing that very deep work that they've probably never had the time and space to do before, that's going to have really long-term impact, not to resolve short-term crises. But there are lots of intensive therapists that love to resolve short-term crises, and I love to refer to them. So if somebody's not a good fit for me, something I love about how much the intensive field has expanded is I can always find a good fit for someone.
I love that. That was so helpful. I appreciate you walking someone through what that looks like for you so they can develop their own process if they decide to go in this direction. So before we wrap up, I would love to hear the phase in your practice that you're in right now. So you've made the decision to take a sabbatical. And that is kind of a term for me that was always this coveted thing that maybe a tenured professor might do. And so I would love to hear how that came about, how you set yourself up to be able to do that, how you're spending that time, because I think you really are opening people's eyes with the intensives and now this for the possibilities and what could be for us in this field. You're just like breaking through the glass ceiling. I love it.
Yay. I love it too. It gets me so excited. So at the beginning of our time, we talked about how we were just in Panama together. Last summer, I was also with Wellness Counseling Inc. with Arilda in South Africa. It was my first trip with Arilda. My husband and I went, and there's something really magical. I know you and I have both experienced this about being on a therapist retreat where you suddenly have time and space, but you're not exactly on vacation. So like you're not like with family or like touring the sites. I mean, you're doing that too because Arilda plans very cool trips, but you're still kind of focused on work. And there's some kind of magic that happens at that intersection where you have all this free time. Somebody else is cooking for you. You're in a beautiful setting. You're being really well cared for, but also you're still thinking about work. That just kind of, it happened for me on both trips. It gives you like this new perspective on work. So while I was in South Africa last summer, I thought, you know what? I had moved 3 years prior to doing intensives every other week instead of every week. That was a great move for me and my nervous system. But I was like, I need more. I need something more. What am I going to do? So of course, my first thought was, okay, I'll do one a month. But then I was like, no, that's not it. Again, just listening to my nervous system. So it just came to me, I will take a sabbatical. And like you, I had never considered, oh, I could take a sabbatical. I don't know, it just dropped into my head from, I think, being on this trip. So, you know, a sabbatical is something you have to kind of plan far in advance. So I looked at my calendar, looked at when I had clients coming, and I said, okay, I can do it in April. So this was August. I can do it next April. And then it just happened to coincide so beautifully with the Panama trip. And so I was able to kind of make that the start of my sabbatical. As it has unfolded, because it's been a very unfolding thing, my husband and I decided to travel during the sabbatical. And it was sort of accidental. It came about because of a family vacation. But I'm so grateful because knowing myself and my very unhealthy tendencies as a two, I guarantee you I would have booked intensives during this time if we were going to be here. And so the fact that we won't be here is really helpful. So I'm just like so excited and curious to see what my sabbatical is going to bring. I've been saying to everybody, you'll have to check back with me in July to see. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe on the other side of my sabbatical, I'm going to decide to become a chef. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. That's the thing. I have no idea. I mean, sure, maybe I will decide that my practice will be exactly the same. That could be what I decide. But I'm just excited to have the spaciousness to be with it and see. I've been in the field for 21 years. I think it's time to take a step.
Well deserved. Well, I couldn't be more excited for you. And this is such a great segue. I strongly encourage everyone to follow you on Instagram. You post great content. And I would love if you would share it with everyone so that we can stay tuned for how your practice evolves through and after this experience, how people can follow along, learn more about you if they're interested in consulting with you, utilizing you for intensives when you return. So I'll include all the links, but fill everyone in on where they can find you.
Thank you, Julia. So definitely follow me on Instagram. I have a lot of fun on Instagram. My Instagram is T with a trauma therapist, T with a trauma therapist. My online course is also twithatraumatherapist.com, and that's a trauma healing course. Signing up for my newsletter is a great way to stay in touch. It's on my website. My website is charityoreilly.com. So if people go to the bottom of every single page on my website, they can sign up for my newsletter. I will be sharing about the sabbatical. I'm also sharing about my new book that I wrote with my husband that's coming out in August. So that information will be in the newsletter. So yeah, the newsletter, Instagram, or I also do therapist experiential intensives. So therapists come and do, of course, I work with lots of therapists just as clients, but they'll do it around their own practice. So they say, I want to do an intensive practice. Let me experience it, kind of how I did, but also we'll be working specifically on the blocks to their intensive practice. So who are the parts and what are the experiences in your life that are keeping you from your intensive practice or whatever your practice is, whatever practice of that person's dreams are. So that's a great way to connect as well as to do a therapist experiential. And on my website, that's what that page is called, Therapist Experientials.
I love it. And you have to tell us about both of these books. I learned about them obviously in my conversations with you, but fill everybody else in so that they can find them if they're interested.
Well, another plug for doing an intensive practice is you have more time. So I was able to make another dream come true, which when I was 4 years old, that's what I said from the time I was 4, I'm going to be an author. I didn't know about being a therapist. I said I'm going to be an author. And so a couple of years ago, I had the privilege to co-write my first book with 2 other therapist colleagues. It is not for therapists. It is for your friends and family member who will not go to therapy. We cover sort of all the best evidence-based coping strategies, as well as resources, everything from podcasts to books to apps to websites. We do talk about therapy as well, but as the sort of the last thing, like if you've tried all these other things and they still haven't worked. So we cover the 25 most common mental health conditions. The book is called You Will Get Through This, a mental health toolkit. And we really are just so thrilled. It was named an essential resource for all libraries. So you should be able to find it in your local public library. And if you want to purchase it for somebody in your life who won't go to therapy, you can buy it anywhere books are sold. It was also named a best resource guide of 2025, which was really exciting. And then our publisher asked if Tom and I would write a book about ADHD. So we wrote that over the past year, and that will be published in August. And I'm also working on my first fiction book, which is super fun.
Oh, can you share anything about that?
Oh, sure. My first fiction book is about a therapist who discovers she's a witch.
Oh my goodness. I love it. Wow. Well, you've given us such a window into your world and what people can expect working with you and learning from you. So I am so grateful that we connected, that we got to meet in person, that I got to be around you and your husband, which was such a treat. And I am so happy that you have found something that is so aligned with you and how you practice and how to feel fulfilled. And I hope you have the best time on your sabbatical.
I will, Julia. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you again in Sedona.
Woohoo! Thank you.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.